why this island is what it is now, you have to go back in time about 200 years or so, back to about 1775. So if you came to San Francisco or to California in 1775, what would you have seen if you were right here in 1775? Not much. Yeah. Things were completely different, of course. Who owned the territory of Alta California in 1775? Spain. Yeah. The Spanish came to California in 1769. They started a string of missions in San Diego, and they put Catholic missions up the coast to Sonoma, about 1 hour away. San Francisco was one of those stops. Mission de Assisi, San Francisco. Now in 1775, there were Spanish missionaries here. There were Native American Indians that fished and hunted on this bay. There wasn't much else. San Francisco did not even exist in 1775. That was actually a little dusty sand dune covered village called Yerba Buena. About 100 people lived in Yerba Buena. The rest of that area was nothing but rolling sand. If you look across the bay, on many days there were so many birds flying around over this waterway because there were so many fish in that bay that birds would block out the sunlight, just like smoke covering the sky. You couldn't see the sun because of all the birds flying over the waterway here. That eastern slope over there, that's the East Bay of Berkeley and Oakland. That was a giant redwood forest, 250-foot tall redwood trees, the whole thing. No city over there. All that was cut down to build San Francisco. If you were out here on Alcatraz, what do you suppose was here in 1775? All right. Sort of treasures. And he sails up the coast, 3,000 miles or so from around South America. And he turns his ship into that little opening out there where the Golden Gate Bridge is. Has anybody been out to the Golden Gate Bridge yet? All right. Go out there. It's cool. It's 1 mile wide. It's really narrow. It's hard to see that little opening when you're sailing a ship along 3,000 miles of coast. However, he sees that opening, he turns his ship inside of this bay, he looks through his periscope on a clear day, and he sees this island. That smooth rock, black on the top and white on the bottom. As he gets closer, way to save money wherever they could. You had to pay a lot of money to get your supplies out here by boat. But what is the most expensive thing you always have to put out money for when you're building something?
Labor.
Labor. People to do the work. So the brickwork, that beautiful brickwork down there that you saw that built the archways, that was done by a stonemason who made about $150 a day in 1857. That's fantastic money. I don't even make that much money now in a week. So the soldiers here knew that in order to save money, they had to save money on labor. Those first 13 prisoners were put to work with picks and shovels. They chiseled this cliff away to make the road here by hand for free because they're prisoners. So you can imagine the popularity of prison labor. And they kept asking for more prisoners and more prisoners. So that first population of 13 by 1870 grows to be a population of almost 800 prisoners on Alcatraz Island. They're all doing the work out here. They're chiseling the rock, they're mixing the concrete, they're putting in the brick, they're doing everything except for the locks on the doors pretty much here. Now correct me if I'm wrong, but you cannot fit 800 prisoners down in that little cell down there, can you? So where do you put them?
Build something new.
You have them build their own house, their own prison. So if you were standing here in 1875, you would have not seen this roadway here. You would have seen a big building going up and over the road and down the cliff. It went from the back of that building all the way up to the end of this building here. 3 stories tall, about 382 cells. All gone now. So the thing is you build things out here, they get demolished, things change, things fall apart. But this is the site of it's the perfect landing place for everybody coming to go get gold. Now, how do you come to California to get gold in 1848? How are you going to get here? Ship? Trolley? Horseback? There were no railroads across the country at that time. You could come by on a horse, but you might get killed by the Indians. So the best way to get here was by ship. That's why that little opening out there, the Golden Gate, is so important, because that was like the front door to this bay here. Anybody who sails in that opening into this bay can get all the gold that they want and have everything for themselves. Now, who do you suppose would come to the gold rush, maybe uninvited? Somebody you wouldn't want to show up at the gold rush. Jack Sparrow. Pirates. So imagine, the U.S. government is 3,000 miles away. They have very little control over this land. And if a pirate shows up, maybe from Spain, maybe from Russia, maybe from Britain, maybe from Mexico, an armed fleet of ships show up in this bay, they take away this water here, they have control of the new city of San Francisco, they have control of all the gold coming out of the mountains, and they have control of the largest seaport on the entire west coast of North America. You need to protect this bay from the bad guys. How are you going to do that, though?
Build a fort.
You build a fort. Where are you going to build a fort? Right here. 1961 until 1933. All the prisoners that did time out here between 1861 and 1933 built everything you see here, including the cell house. In 1933, the military leaves Alcatraz. There's no need for a military prison in San Francisco anymore. So they pack up everything and they leave the island. However, in 1930s, what's going on in the world? The Depression. And what else is going on here in the States? The Prohibition, right. Anybody not know what the Prohibition is? We all know in one way or another. Prohibition essentially was called the Volstead Act. It was an American law put into effect that essentially made public sale and consumption of alcohol and gambling and prostitution illegal. Now, if you take the Depression, everybody probably wants a drink, right? We're all having a hard time. We're trying to find comfort, food, clothing, shelter, but you can't go get a drink because they're not available. So who makes this available to us in the times of the 1930s? Gangsters, Al Capone especially. So in the 30s, there was this rise of crime in the United States. Al Capone and gangster-era crime, people who were taking advantage of average people for their own profit. Now in the 30s, did we have debit cards, Google Pay, iPhones? No, we all carried cash. We all went to the bank. It was easy to make a great killing on a bank robbery. You could easily walk out with 50 to 100 grand. So bank robbery, that was a big crime. When bank robbery started to get controlled by the law, kidnapping for ransom, postal train robbery, all sorts of other ways of making money, violent acts of crime. In addition to that, larceny, counterfeiting, running illegal gambling rings, all this made people afraid. And the government realized they needed to prove a point to gangsters, especially criminals like Capone, that this crime does not pay. So the very next year, 1934, this island reopens as a federal pen. Maximum security prison. All these military buildings are turned into the first experimental max security prison in the country. The fences get built, the guard towers get put up, and the cells that you see inside get modified to hold those kind of criminals 24 hours a day. So where we're going to be going inside now, this is originally a military prison building. However,
you're operating with. And for these weapons here, they are real. They came from Lompoc prison though, but the collection I have is meant to reflect on the 29 years that Alcatraz was part of the Bureau of Prisons. So this is most likely what inmates would have had access to and created back then. So with these weapons though, as you guys look at them, they're big, they're scary, but they're not necessarily meant to be fatal, again, if sticking to the rules. These are just meant to be scare tactics. Because if you're a new guy here on the island, it doesn't matter how tough you were at the site you came from, what your reputation was there, you're new, you're vulnerable here, you're still learning convict code. So when you're working in the industries, if the officer turns his back momentarily to keep his eye on the other men at work, you, as the more established inmate, you might have created something like this and hid it on your workstation. And that's your opportunity. You take this weapon out, you corner the new guy, you put this up to his cheek or up to his neck, and you cut him deep enough to draw some blood, and you say, do what I tell you or else. There's a whole number of outcomes to that, right? In the early years, though, keep in mind, a lot of men were trying to escape, so you might be collateral damage on that escape route, right? All different outcomes. But if you see something like this being held up to your face, up to your neck, right, it's a scary thing.
You did not know that this was a hospital. Did you see anything that looks like something you'd see in a hospital besides that room? Yeah. You have to have an imagination here, is what I'm getting at. Everything in this building, by and large, is missing. You don't see prisoners here anymore. You don't see doctors or nurses. You don't see a whole lot of medical equipment. If you're walking through here, you saw a surgical table down in that operating room at the end. You see a few things over here. You saw a couple of bathtubs, but this doesn't look like much of a hospital. It's just a decaying relic. So I always like to describe Alcatraz. It's somewhat similar to a human body without the flesh and the muscles. You're just looking at the skeleton remains of what this place was. Now, going back to that whole theme of dark and light. Actually, pause for a moment. Let's talk about the layout of the hospital first. So when you came up that doorway there, let's say you were an inmate who got shanked in the shower room, and you had a shank sticking out of your chest. They'd have to haul you upstairs on a stretcher. They get inside that gateway that we walk through, and they bring you down the hallway into the triage room, the operating room. They do a surgical procedure to remove the shank. That is the most acute treatment down there. And from that end, all these treatment rooms along the hallway go from the most important services down to the least important services. So you show up down there with an acute illness, a broken bone, a surgical problem. They fix you up, they take x-rays, they dispense medications, maybe they treat some sort of mental illness, and by the time you end up down here, most likely you're recovering in a bed eating ice cream or, at least awake and alive. So it goes from the worst to the least. Now, this room here originally, when it was a military prison, it was minimum security. The bars did not exist. It was an open room with about 40 beds. Military inmates in here being treated for whatever ailed them. And in those early years, remember, the prisoners were doing the work of building this island. So if you're doing hard labor, swinging a pick outside in the hot sun, common injuries, broken bones, heat exhaustion, crushing injuries, traumas, and other work-related problems would have brought you up to this hospital. And most likely you would be repaired of your ailments and you'd wake up feeling better here eventually after time, and then you'd go back to work. And in those early days, this was somewhat of an enlightening facility because they had the best surgical equipment here, the best doctors. They were U.S. Navy doctors, no female nurses, all male staff. But you could get the best treatment money could offer here for a prisoner. It was pretty good, right? No family members or guards were treated up here. The family members of the guards who lived on the island, they got treated in San Francisco. But in the early years, this was a good... Possible. However, somebody did it. So you never know. You'll learn about that later. Now the significance of this section here, A block, this is the way that it looked when it was first built in 1912. Not much has changed in over 106 years. So the original doors are still intact. The original layout is still intact, the old spiral staircases. This was never used for the federal prison, and it's kind of cool that it was left this way. The other significance of this old section is what's down below our feet. There is something below this floor that is a space that we'll be going to shortly. As a maximum security prison was designed to make prisoners follow the rules, do what they were told. If you were not doing what you were told, you would go to solitary confinement. So imagine, you're a prisoner and you're being told to work. You're given a pick and you're picking rock in the hot sun 7 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day. What do your hands look like after swinging a pick for one day? They're sore, they're red, they have blisters, you're tired. Imagine day after day after day working outside. If a prisoner goes up to the guard and says, "Hey guard, I'm not working today," and throws down his pick, what do you suppose that's going to cause? A strike, mayhem, chaos. All the other prisoners see that one prisoner acting up, they're going to do it too. So the idea is for the guard to take that inmate who is potentially causing a problem and give him something else to do besides work. So if you were an inmate who was refusing to work, they would bring you down those stairs. When you got to the bottom of the stairs, they'd turn on the lights here possibly for a minute. They'd strip you down naked. They'd walk you over to this cell, one of these cells. They'd open up the gate. They would make you stand inside. They would cuff your hands and your feet to the front of the gate, with the gate closing on your nose, and essentially lock you in a standing position and leave you with the lights off in here for the amount of time you were supposed to be working, possibly 8 to 12 hours in a standing position with cuffs. Anybody ever tried that before? Thank you.